It is 8 p.m. and it is late on the East Coast here. I'm not sure about everybody else. I know we've got a lot of people from different regions, but so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. First off, thank you guys for joining me tonight. I know it's a Monday night and it's a little bit later. I've been experimenting with the days of the week to see how many people show up to which one. So this is actually a pretty good turnout. Had several hundred people sign up for this. So thank you guys for taking time out of your schedules to do this. And so the way that I've done this in the past, and this is the first time in a while that I've used this software for a webinar, but it seems to be working all right now. It does have the ability to communicate with me. I've got you guys all muted, and your screens, obviously, I'm not seeing you. I'm not hearing you, but you can type in questions in the question section. And then I will answer them. And usually what I do is if it's a question that really pertains to the slide that we're talking about, the subject that we're talking about, then I may jump on there and answer that question. A lot of times I do, and some of the best information sometimes comes from that kind of back and forth. So I really do encourage you guys to ask questions. Just please, during the presentation, kind of keep it to what we're talking about, just so we don't get off track. At the end, I'll stay up all night with you guys answering questions. So save any questions that aren't pertinent to that slide for the very end, and we'll talk fish and we'll talk shop for quite a bit. So I'm going to put this into presentation mode. I'm not sure if you guys can see me, but I know that you can hear me. At least I'm pretty sure. Yeah, looks good. All right. Come on. All right, so this presentation, this webinar, I've done a lot of webinars in the past, and Navionics is actually the company that provides the platform for these webinars. So it's really cool what they do. They actually will record this, and we're going to post it. And so, but it's just really cool to be able to interact with you guys live, which is awesome. Thank you, Kevin, for confirming that you can see me. Keeps on going back. Let me see if I can do this. Okay, so this presentation is going to be about breaking down a lake quickly. Okay, and my name is Miles Burghoff, aka Sonar. And it is going to be presented and sponsored by Lucky Tackle Box. Lucky Tackle Box is a partner of mine. They're a great brand that offers a great service. Essentially, every month you get a box that you subscribe to, just full of different baits and different tackle, and it's just really awesome service that allows you to really get outside your comfort zone, get outside of what you would normally throw and the tackle that you normally use, and it forces you to try something different. So thank you, Lucky Tackle Box, for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you, Navionics, and let's get going because it's a Monday night. It's a school night. All right, about me, my name is Miles Burghoff, aka Sonar. I'm an FLW Tour professional angler, actually a rookie this year. This is my first year fishing the tour. Really excited about it, and it's been a fairly good start so far. So that's been a lot of fun. I don't know why it keeps on going back and forth. I also co-host a show called Sweetwater TV, which is on NBC Sports, Sportsman's Channel, and also on a streaming network called Waypoint TV. And so, yeah, I love doing that job too. And then I also guide on Lake Chickamauga. Not right now because it is way too high. But when it's normal, absolutely, I'll take you out fishing. And I'm just an overall bass junkie, so. All right, so what are we going to talk about tonight? This was actually one of the harder slideshows that I've ever had to make, because it's such a intricate and diverse topic. Breaking down a body of water quick, there's a lot of different factors that go into it, and so it's difficult to kind of condense it into a presentation that isn't going to last all night and into the next day. But we're going to be talking about making a lake your own, which I think I put it at the top because I think that's one of the most important things that we're going to be talking about today, one of the most important things we're going to be touching up on, and so I put that at the very top. And then we're going to be talking about my 3-step process, which includes a lot of different things. Number 1, it's going to be preliminary research and monitoring. Number 2 is scouting and practice. Number 3 is on the water decision making. Okay, so there's 3 steps. There's a lot of different things under each step. But that's kind of the way that I structure going to a new body of water, or going to a lake I haven't been to in a while that has gone through some changes. And then we're going to be talking about some seasonal considerations and tools of the trade. All right, let's get right into it. I don't know why it does that. Let me see if I can fix that before we start. Come on. All right, technical difficulties. But anyways, all right, so first topic, making the lake your own. Okay, so this is one thing I really want to emphasize throughout this whole thing. My style of fishing is more instinct based. It's about putting yourself in a position to run by your gut, run instinctually and make decisions a split second that are, instinct based. Okay, so running with your gut. So I think it's the most important aspect of finding fish fast. Making the lake your own, and kind of molding the lake to the way that you like to fish, I think is very, very important. It's the easiest way to start catching fish, and put yourself in your comfort zone. And your comfort zone is very, very important, and it's something that I try to find everywhere I go. The key to this, at least the first key, is to focus on a part of the lake that feels most familiar to you. Okay, it allows you to use the techniques that you're best at. For instance, if I go to a deep and clear reservoir such as Cumberland, I went to Cumberland, and it's got vertical sides, it has very bluff banks, and that's a very difficult type of lake for me to get used to. So when I go to a body of water, I look at it not from the locals' perspective, the people that are used to fishing the tactics on that body of water, but I kind of, look for those areas that look familiar to me, something that I've had experience with in the past. So generally for me, being a shallow water power fisherman, I like to find those creeks that have a little bit more stained water, and have largemouth, and so I kind of go back in the creeks. But that is what I mean by making a lake your own. Don't try to beat the local guys in those local areas. Try to mold the lake to your preferences. So there's some key questions you have to ask yourself. Okay, when I go to a body of water, I really just have a heart-to-heart with myself and say, what are my go-to tactics? What are the things that I do best and that I enjoy the most and I make the best decisions with? And things like throwing a chatterbait, flipping and pitching, dragging a Carolina rig. Those kind of things are things that I love to do, and I'm really, really good at it. And so I focus on the areas that allow me to do those things. Another thing I've got to ask myself is, what water clarity do I feel confident in for that body of water? And generally, I like stained water. Stained to moderately muddy water is what I like to focus on. So I find those areas that have that stained and muddy water. And then another question you got to ask yourself, especially during the spring, is what area of the lake has fish in a phase you feel most comfortable targeting them on, you know, whether it's pre-spawn, spawn, or post-spawn. You know, focus on the fish that you want to fish for, that you're really good at. For instance, you know, talking about the spawn, I'm not a sight fishing guy. I'm not very good at it yet. I can catch fish, you know, when I'm not sight fishing for them off the beds. But I'd prefer to fish for pre-spawn and post-spawn fish because they group up a little bit more and they're a little bit more aggressive in my opinion in many cases. So for instance, if the fish are spawning down by the clear, you know, deep portion, the dammed portion of a lake, generally up the lake, up the river is where you're going to find those fish that are in post-spawn mode. So I might actually fish a whole different region of the lake just so I can fish for fish that are in a different mood. And then what species, oh, sorry. And then you have to ask yourself, what species do I like targeting the most? There's no use in fishing for a species if you have the option of fishing for one that you're comfortable with. Like for instance, I'm going to Champlain. I'm not a smallmouth guru yet. I feel comfortable up in Champlain to a certain degree when they're doing certain things, especially if I'm vertical fishing. But when it comes to the spawning smallmouth, I just don't have as much experience with that. So I focus on largemouth and I make it work with largemouth. And keep in mind, all these things, you have to gauge whether or not you can actually, how much you can mold a lake to your expertise on a case-by-case basis. You might have to fish for smallmouth. You might have to fish the clear water. You might have to use techniques that you're not 100% comfortable with. That is a rare circumstance, but you just keep in mind that you may have to do something like that. All right, so we've got some questions. Let me look through them real quick before we go. All right. Bashara, I'm not sure what the echo is. I'll try to fix it if I can think of something. Those of you that are raising your hands, if you can go ahead and just write in the comment section or the question section. If you can't, just keep your hand up, and then I'll open up your audio. All right, what was I doing? Okay, so some people have echoes, some people don't. What is the best you can tell way you can tell what phase the bass are in, spawn, post-spawn, in muddy conditions? The best way to tell whether or not the fish are in post-spawn conditions is really the condition of the fish themselves. Your job during practice or during the tournament is to evaluate fish as you go, fish in areas as you go, and you know, during the post-spawn, if they're kind of going to, if you catch them off the cover that is close to those spawning areas, then you can kind of surmise that, and it's above like 66 degrees or something like that. If they're not exactly on the spawning areas, but they're far away and they're kind of beat up and they've already got worn down tails, those are all keys to kind of tell you whether or not they're in post-spawn or spawn. The other side of the spectrum, if they're in pre-spawn, they're just beautiful white fish. If you catch a white fish, that means that it's normally just moving in and there's a group of them there. A very light colored fish in shallow water means that there's a wave of fish moving in. All right, so some of these I'm going to go ahead and wait until the end. All right, so let's get back to the presentation because we've got some people need to go to bed sometime. Um, all right, so my three-step process: preliminary research and monitoring. This is kind of approaching some of the questions that you guys already have. Um, At-home research and conditions monitoring is essential to my process. And we're talking about my process. It may be a little bit different for you, and I really encourage you to kind of build your own process and steps. But for me, researching the conditions before I go to a lake and leading up to the first days that I go to a lake is really important, especially when it comes to monitoring weather patterns. Okay, it's really important, especially in those transition seasons like spring and fall, where those fish are moving great distances and really have like they have a mission. They've got something they got to do. In the spring it's to spawn, in the fall it is to feed up for the winter. So it's really important to monitor weather patterns, because leading up to your trip, whether it's a tournament or fun fishing trip, it's really important to know what happened 2 weeks before. I use the 2 week rule because I think that that's a good gauge. You kind of understand enough of what the weather patterns are to be able to make good decisions once you get there. For instance, so the 2 week rule, like Toho just went there. If I didn't monitor the weather and what the temperature was and the predominant wind, what was going on down there, I wouldn't know that it had been consistently cold leading up to that FLW Tour event, and that just during the first day of practice, it started warming up, and we had this massive warming trend. If I had just showed up and had no idea what was going on prior to that trip, I wouldn't have known that those fish were just rare. They were ready to get up and spawn. They were ready to get on the beds. So I may have not been able to anticipate that wave of fish. Now, it wasn't a great tournament for me, but I did make a check, and a lot of it had to do with my monitoring the weather. Another thing that I do is map and satellite scouting. I use the Navionics mobile app constantly. I mean, the Navionics mobile app is probably the #1 app that's fishing related used on my phone, for sure. It's not only great for the contours that you can research these lakes on, but it's also really good for satellite data. uh, routing is like picking a bunch of points to route up to an area that you're interested in fishing, so you can see how the distance and how long it's going to take you. It's got launch ramp data, it's got all kinds of points of interest and stuff like that. And then of course, cross-referencing satellite imagery is really important. We as anglers, we utilize satellite imaging a lot, but I think a lot of people just use one type of satellite imaging, whether it's Google Earth or Bing or iMaps. And I think it's really, really important for you to cross-reference between those different platforms, because the different platforms not only have different pictures, but they have pictures at different times and under different conditions. For instance, and a great example of cross-referencing different maps that are taken at different times, or cross-referencing different satellite images, Lake Douglas. Douglas here in Tennessee is a lake that fluctuates 40 plus feet every single season. It's probably way up right now. But so what I look for is I've got one map that shows me at full pool, and then I've got one that I've found that shows me when it's really, really low, so I can see all the foundations, I can see all the shale and chunk rock, all those things that I'm looking for, all those different things I can see just by changing the date and changing the source of the satellite images. So that's really important to be able to find fish quickly and breaking down that lake, because you're getting, not only are you getting the contour maps on the Navionics app or on your unit, but now you're getting to see the actual way the bottom is, what it's comprised of, what the structural elements are: rock, sheet rock, or not sheet rock, but shale, whatever it may be. And a lot of times I find a lot of brick and stuff on that lake. All right. Again, continuing with preliminary research and monitoring. Um, Let me just kind of look here at the questions. Okay. I'm gonna I'm gonna hold off on the questions just for now till the end of the. This time I think it'll be best if I just wait till the end. So thank you guys for asking the questions. I'm gonna wait till the end. Um, all right. So information gathering is the next step. Okay, and this is something that I still do, and I still kind of battle with how much information I gather. You want to make sure you do your due diligence and you feel like you're doing the work, but I found, and this is just personally, that general information is what gets the job done and allows me to do my job when I go fish a new lake. Tournament fishing. It allows me to make better decisions in the moment. So I get very general information. I don't get waypoints very often. I don't get specific spots. I don't get specific baits. I just get generals. Water level and fluctuation information. For instance, Sam Rayburn. I leading up to that event, not only was I monitoring the weather, but I was also monitoring the water level. What the normal water level is for that time of year and what it's at now. And when I went there, it was 8 foot high, and I know from monitoring that it had been gradually going up that entire time leading up to the tournament. So that was a big key, is knowing going into that event what the water level was. Another thing that I think is really important is historically productive areas. Calling somebody that knows that lake and just saying, hey, what general area tends to be strong, on this body of water? Very important. Finding out, from tournament data and all those things, what areas really do produce in general is a really, really important way to eliminate. It's a great way to eliminate a lot of water. Okay, right off the bat, you can say, okay, this section of the lake is where I need to focus my efforts. But one word of caution when you're doing that is when you're talking with somebody that knows that lake, they're going to tell you what generally does well for the locals and for somebody else. It may be a region of the lake, like we talked about earlier. Say that by the dam somewhere, that's the place to be. It may not be the place to be for you. So you've got to be able to sift through all this general information to pick and choose the things that are going to work for you. And that's what I did at Sam Rayburn. Even though somebody told me that this is the area that you need to be, and most of the guys in the top 10 were there, I made, a 12th place finish by fishing the exact opposite, side of the lake, a lake that nobody mentioned. So just because you're getting this information on historically productive areas doesn't mean you need to follow it. And then lure and color preferences, keep it general. You can dip a little bit into some of the specifics, but don't get bogged down with the specific information. A really good example of learning a general lure and color preferences is the Harris chain. Harris chain down in Florida is really unique because it fishes like Florida Lake, but one of the things that the fish really love, and they love it elsewhere in Florida too, but one thing that they really love on the Harris chain in particular is just a finesse worm, whether it's June bug, black, any dark colored finesse worm flipped in that heavy cover. I would have never thought that. I would have been flipping something like a palmetto bugs or some type of craw bait, some type of creature bait. But they love that slender profile on that lake, so that's really important. And then also knowing what the dominant species is. What is going to be likely to win a tournament? Is it going to be one on smallmouth? Is it going to be predominantly largemouth spots? Understand, and it's also important to understand the difference between a Florida largemouth and a northern strain largemouth. They're two totally different beasts. Down at Sam Rayburn, for instance, they've got Florida strain largemouth. So when a cold front hit, that hit them hard. I mean, that kicked them right in the teeth. And a lot of the reaction bites that I got during practice, I was getting quite a bit of them completely shut off during the tournament because they're Florida strain. Northern strain are a little bit more resilient to change. Um, And then you organize and prepare your tackle accordingly. I think it's really important to, before a trip, rig up every rod that you have with every possible tactic that might work. Okay, so you don't have to go through that process of while you're on the boat and you're just got this gut feeling about throwing a jig. Then you don't have to have that internal battle with yourself about whether or not you're going to rig up a jig rod. You've just got one ready to go. So, and then the whole idea is to create a loose plan for practice and scouting. So you don't want a tight plan, like a plan that you're just going to stick with. It's rarely going to benefit you in the long run. Create a very loose plan leaves enough room to kind of go with the flow, fish the conditions. All right, so scouting and practice. First thing I want to say, beware of scouting and practicing too much. And this is really important for certain times of the year, especially right now. The springtime, I did one day on the upcoming event on Seminole. Before the cutoff, I went out there and drove around, did a little bit of fishing. I actually had a fun time. But I made sure that I didn't spend too much time out there because I don't want to get too bogged down on what was happening then. Because during the springtime, things are transitioning very, very quickly, and so I don't want to have those memories of what was happening, a month ago, or a month and a half ago, or even a week ago. I want to have enough. I want to be dumb enough to be able to make the decisions, on the fly and not have to be, worried about all the information that I have. So beware of practice. I generally do 1 day of practice or scouting per 1 day in the tournament or 1 day fishing. Okay, so I think that's a good rule. Unless it's a 1 day tournament that's important, throw a couple days in there. 10-minute rule. I like to use 10 minutes. I like to fish 10 minutes at a time with a certain technique or in a certain area. I think that's really important. Keeping seasonal patterns in mind is also very important. And we're going to be talking about some of the seasonal considerations in following slides. But when you go to a lake and you go to either practice or you're going to fish the tournament, it's really important to have in mind what the fish are likely doing based on seasonal patterns, which are pretty accurate from year to year. We know what the general movements of the fish are from year to year. So it's something really important. One thing that's really essential, I think, during scouting and practice, and is something that I really emphasize and work hard at, is being efficient. Not wasting a lot of time. And backtracking on a lake is one of the main things that is going to waste a lot of time. Going to one area, coming over to another area, and then going back to an area that's close to that other area is it's very highly inefficient. So what I do is I usually attack a lake, the points that I'm interested in a clockwise or counterclockwise fashion. So I just kind of go around the lake, whatever that may be. I might start on the western shoreline of like a lake that has a lot of creeks and work my way to the eastern shoreline, that sort of thing. I also use the routing feature in the Navionics app because I need to know what the distance is between the points of interest that I have. Because sometimes I want to put the boat on the trailer and put in another ramp. And using that routing feature, I can see exactly how far I am from another spot, so I can make that decision. Is it going to be faster and less expensive to put the boat on the trailer? And I can make that decision. The rule of two. Okay, this is something that kind of goes against the grain a little bit for people. A lot of people will shake off fish constantly. They just shake off fish during practice and they don't catch any. I think this is a mistake for the majority of the situations. I almost always catch 2 fish in a spot. If I'm going into a new area, unless I already know that area and I know what lives in there, I'm going to catch 2 fish. Sucks when you catch an 8-pounder during practice. That's kind of a bad feeling, and sometimes I will just catch that one and then leave. But in general, it's really beneficial to catch 2 fish to see the number one, the quality, you know, because fish do tend to congregate by size. So I know the size, but I also see the shape of the fish. We talked about fish, you know, white fish that are very light colored, moving in from the main lake. It's really important to be able to recognize that kind of thing when it happens, because if you do start catching, you catch two white colored fish very quick, that may mean that you have a huge wave of fish moving in, and you wouldn't know that if you just shook them off. So very important. And also you can also see the other condition of the fish, you know, the tail being worn down, so it's a post-spawn fish. You know, if it's all beat up and just skinny, that may mean that it's a residential fish and not a fish that is joined with by a bunch of other fish. So really, it's really important to catch some fish during practice to kind of see what you're dealing with. All right. Again, scouting and practice, working in or working out. You know, on these reservoirs that have got these creeks and these you know, these spawning areas, especially, and how are you going to approach it? Are you going to start from the outside and work in, you know, towards the back, or are you going to go all the way to the back, fish there, and start working out to find the fish? And that really depends on the situation. And it's very important to make that distinction for the transition months like fall and spring, because those fish are moving constantly. During the summer, it's not as big of a deal at all. And during the wintertime, it's not that big of a deal either until it gets into spring. So you know, during the early spring, I'll start on the outside and work my way in. During what should be the post spawn, I'll start in the back and work my way out. So it just really depends. And the same thing during the fall. In the fall, early fall, I'll start kind of the mouth of the creek where they're in their summertime patterns and start working my way in, and vice versa during the late fall. Okay, so it's something that is pretty important. Okay. It's really important to anticipate where they will be for your trip to the lake, whether it's a tournament or, you know, whatever trip you're planning for, you're preparing for. It's really important to have a mind on what they're going to be doing once you get there. You know, when I do a scouting trip, I'm never really focused on where they are right now. I'm focused on where they will end up being come the tournament, depending on the conditions. My goal when I'm practicing is to find the most active or dumb fish in a population. You know, I'm not trying to just go out there and you know, try to catch a bunch of fish. I'm out there to cover a ton of water, eliminate parts of the lake that I don't feel are most productive, and just find fish, populations of fish, the largest populations. Well, how you're going to do that is just covering water quickly, not spending a lot of time. You may not be throwing the bait that is going to catch the most amount of fish, but if you catch fish, there's likely going to be more fish around. So I just cover water, and you know, even the smallest bite can tell me a lot about an area. Oh. All right. All right, on the water decision making, I just wanted to, this is, you know, I just wanted to throw this in there. Keep in mind when you get out there, you're fishing the tournament, you're you know, having that fun fishing trip with friends, and you need to catch fish. You have the practice, you have all your research, and it's just, it should be in the back of your mind, but not in the front of your mind. Current conditions are most important. It's really important to just focus on making good decisions in the moment. Use practice as a loose plan, but always be willing to abandon patterns in favor of your gut instincts. And when you feel the wheels coming off, consider doing a 180. For example, at the recent FLW Tour event, the last one we had on Lake Toho and the Kissimmee chain, the first day, during the entire practice, I was having a terrible practice. I know that chain so well, and I was just doing what I had done in the past. Just through all my experience, I was doing exactly that and doing terrible. And the first day of the tournament came in with like 10, 12, 10, 13, very mediocre bag for Toho Kissimmee chain. But what ended up happening was the second day, I finally, as I was running to a spot, I saw a spot at the corner of my eye that that just was nothing like I had fished that tournament. It wasn't protected from a north wind. It wasn't in an area I've ever caught a fish, and I decided to do a 180. And I fought myself over it, turned around, followed my gut, went into that area, and that's how I salvaged my tournament. So it's important to have good information, have good experience, but it's also good to abandon that if it's not working. All right, seasonal considerations. We're going to breeze through this because I think most of us know the kind of the seasons that we're dealing with bass fishing. This is arguably the most important factor when it comes to breaking down a lake, because you can eliminate so much water right off the bat. You can say, all right, they're spawning, so I can cut out all this main lake structure and focus on those spawning areas. So it's really important to know what the seasonal patterns are. So let's talk about spring. Spring is probably the most volatile month of the year, or I say month, I meant season, most volatile season of the year. And like I said before, beware of pre-practice. This is the time of year that pre-practice is it's going to kill you sometimes. It's really going to work against you. And I'm not talking about practice right before an event. I'm talking about pre-practice a couple weeks, a month ahead of time. So it's really important to just focus on the current conditions. Focus on transition structure and cover leading to the backs of these spawning areas, and that's the kind of areas that they're going to use for pre and post spawn situations. So it's just pay attention to those transition types of cover and also structure too. Secondary points that lead into the backs of pockets and creeks are really, really important, and other types of structure too. Hard cover can be key for all phases of the spawn. Big fish love hard cover, whether it's rocks or wood. I really do believe that big females, full of eggs, they like to rub up against harder pieces of cover, whether it's wood, a stump, or whatever it is, to loosen up the eggs. And I think so I think that's why part of the reason why hard cover is so good. Focus on areas that have suitable hard bottom and are protected from a predominant wind, which is usually from the north. So usually I'm looking at northern pockets that are real protected, and that's the type of area that I'm looking for. But as we saw in Toho, if there's no wind, it really opens up a lot more areas. So keep that in mind. All right. Seasonal considerations, summer. This is the most stable season. Fish really just spread out, and they're in all different types of places. This is a really good time of the year to fish your strengths, whatever that may be. You can catch fish doing it. Deep, shallow, it doesn't seem to matter. The fish are there. Usually you have more fish deep, but there's plenty of fish shallow too. Pre-fishing can be really valuable during this period because the fish aren't really moving around a lot. Once they get to those summer areas, they pretty much stay there through the summer. June, May, all the way through August and September. So it's a really stable period of time. So you can theoretically, you can go find fish 2 weeks in advance, and they'll still be there. Like I said, it's really a time you can use your strengths. Fall. Fall is also a really volatile transition season, and once that first influx of really cold water, or even just cooler water, hits the lake, the migration becomes a huge factor. I mean, fish start moving really, really fast, following the shad and other bait fish into the backs of those creeks. So focus on the creeks that have the incoming water. I think that's essential for that time of year. And you got to figure out, like we talked about, which parts of the creeks the fish are in and which direction they're going. Winter. This is another fairly stable period of time. It's not my favorite to fish in, but it's still a really good period of time. Generally, the fish are going to be in the same area for a long period of time, unless you live on the TVA, and then they're here, there. You never know. Here one day, gone tomorrow. Focus on the more vertical structure during this time of year. That is really important. And it's good to focus on areas that are protected from that cold winter wind and from current. The fish don't generally like to be in the current, which is they kind of break the rules here on the TVA, because I catch a lot of fish on the main river too. And one thing that's really important on, say, a lake like Chickamauga is focusing on the last remaining submergent grass, which after this week, there may not be any more submergent grass on this lake because of the flooding. So we'll see, but it's really important. Once you find that submergent grass still available, it's going to be good. And don't be afraid to fish shallow during the wintertime. All right, so let's talk about the tools of the trade, and let's first focus on electronics. Okay, electronics are probably the best tool that you have to break down a body of water really, really fast, outside of the generals of seasonal patterns, because technology nowadays is just so good. I've actually got 3 different brands on my boat. I've got Humminbird, Lowrance, and Garmin, and I run all of them for different strengths and weaknesses. And I work with a company called bassboatelectronics.com, and they're awesome. They're the ones that rigged up the boat. But so let's break down how I use my 2D down scan, side scan, and Panoptics to catch fish, because each one is really, really good at something. 2D sonar is excellent for when you're on plane and you're searching around. You can, with a through-hole transducer or a well-placed transom transducer, you can maintain bottom contact and find structure while you're on plane. So it's really good for that. It's the only one that would really do that effectively, and it's also really good for finding hard bottom and as well as fish. I actually feel very comfortable with my 2D sonar for scanning for fish. And one little thing that I'll throw in here, just because my nickname is Sonar. One tip that I have that I tell a lot of people is, at your console, run 83 kilohertz or something that's comparable, depending on your brand, because it has a wider cone angle. And then on your bow, put it on 200 kilohertz or something comparable, because it's a narrower beam, which focuses your efforts a little bit more precise. If there's a fish below the boat, it's below the boat. So that's a little tip. More coverage at the console, less at the front. Downscan is a very important tool for finding fish. It's the most important tool for when I'm at the console and idling around, because there's so much target separation between the fish and the bottom that even if I can't see it on the 2D sonar, if the fish is really close to the bottom, I can still see it on the downscan. The downscan is excellent for finding fish, and also figuring out what you're fishing. The target separation. You can see the individual branches on a tree, like you can see in one of the screenshots below, and all that. And then side scan, when side scan came out, and still today, people really think that they think that is the deal for everything. That shows you everything. But because the nature of it's so stretched out, and it's hard to find fish on it sometimes. I still find plenty of fish on it, but usually I'm searching with 2D sonar and down scan when trying to find fish. When I'm trying to find structure, that's when I use side scan and side imaging at the console. And then finally, this one's really cool. This thing is incredible. If you haven't seen it in action yet, Panoptics Live Scope for Garmin is something that you really, really have to experience. Lowrance is coming out with something that's similar. I'm excited about seeing that. But as far as Live Scope goes, it's a tremendous tool. When you're on the bow, it shoots a beam, forward-looking beam, that you can turn the trolling motor and see exactly what's out there in real time. I can cast out there, I can see my bait fall, I can see a fish come up to it, I can see them eat it. At Toho and Sam Rayburn, I could see the fish swimming in and out of the grass. I could find where the grass was thicker. It's just a crazy, crazy tool. So using that on the bow can really help you eliminate water and unproductive casts. And another tool of the trade that's super important for breaking down water is mapping. Do I need a map card? That's a question I get all the time. Absolutely yes. If you buy a GPS depth finder combo and don't buy good mapping for it, you're really, really wasting a lot of money, because just having that extra investment of, you know, 150, 200 bucks to buy a mapping card is really, really going to benefit you, because you know, the preloaded mapping on most of the units is not all that great. So it's really important. And also using the Navionics mobile app. We already talked about that, so I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But I'm telling you, it's awesome, and it's inexpensive. You're essentially paying for contour maps that, you know, at a highly discounted price. It's like 10, 15 bucks or something like that. And it's the same maps that you'd get in a card of $200, plus a bunch of other features too. So. One thing I will say, if you have a Navionics card, turn on Sonar charts. If you don't know how to turn on Sonar charts, I've got some videos on it, or you can just email me at sonar@sonarfishing.com. Email me, I'll show you exactly how to. But Sonar charts are 1 foot contours. They're the most high definition contours on those maps, and they're very, very important for fishing. The next subject is lure choices. Lure choices for breaking down a body of water quickly. It's really important to move fast. Like, this is not a time, you know, when you're trying to break down a lake, you're trying to find active fish, you know, make those stupid ones bite out of a group. And so I focus on fast moving baits until you find the fish. Use reaction baits that you're confident in. So make sure that you get used to and you learn baits in the reaction category. If you're really good at finesse tactics, start really branching out into, you know, different reaction style techniques. I'm not saying you have to be an expert at all of them, but pick 1 or 2 that you feel really confident in, that work really good in a variety of conditions, and focus on those during your practice and when you're trying to break down the lake quick. And use baits that cover all depth zones. I think it's really important to cover all depth zones and to do it in that procedure, you know, from top to bottom or bottom to top, whichever way you decide. Top waters like walking baits, buzz baits, grass kickers, which is you know, from Z-Man, it's a swim bait that's designed to go through heavy vegetation. Covering water quickly, that's what I did down in Florida, was with the grass kickers. Shallow, chatterbait, spinnerbait, squarebill, lipless, those are all really good tactics, and you can move very, very quickly without slowing down, and you can catch fish any time of the year with at least one of those. Mid zone, swim baits really dominate unless you're fishing an Alabama rig. Swim baits are a really good tactic for that middle of the road zone. And then finally, we've got bottom techniques. Deep diving crankbaits are very efficient. Carolina rigs are really, really good because you can cover a lot of water and also get to know the bottom composition really, really well. And then a heavy chatterbait is something that I've added to my tackle box that works really good in deep water situations. And then flutter spoon, another really good way to cover water quickly on, you know, structure, you know, tight groups of fish. Like I said, learn tactics in each category so you can call them your strengths. Final thoughts, and then we're going to get into the questions, because they have piled up, and thank you for those questions. I think that, and this is something that I think you're really going to get something from. It's something that I've learned over the years. How you develop your skills as an angler is what matters the most. Okay, it's what is going to give you success, or it's going to make you experience failure, which you're going to experience failure and success, hopefully, pretty often on the success side, but it's inevitable. Learn to be versatile by getting good at techniques in each category. Like I just said, categories like finesse, you don't have to be good at every single finesse tactic, but pick some that you feel really, really confident in, shaky head, drop shot, whatever, Ned rig, whatever it may be. If you have a bait in a category that if you go into an area that's not exactly your comfort zone, but you need to fish a finesse tactic, at least you have a finesse tactic that you're comfortable with. Power fishing, bottom dragging, reaction baits. Find different baits and techniques within those categories to be good at. Develop your gut instincts. This is something that I really try to tell everybody. I think it's really important how you develop your experiences, because when I moved to Florida, for instance, when I moved there in 2006 after I graduated high school, and I sucked for years. I was terrible. I had no idea what I was in for. I did terrible in tournaments, but slowly gained experience. And the one thing that I really, once I started doing really, really good down in Florida, one thing that I attributed that to was, for 3 years when I moved there, I didn't fish with a single person in my boat other than co-anglers. And what that did was, I wasn't learning from somebody that had been there for a long time. So when I did have an experience, and when I was forced to make a decision, I was making that decision based on my own experiences, not what somebody else told me I should do. Because if you have somebody else that has told you what to do under a certain circumstance, and your gut is telling you something different, you're going to hesitate, and sometimes you're going to make the wrong decision and go for what that other person said. So I think it's really important to find that balance between learning from local, sticks, and also just making the mistakes yourself, and also, having the success by yourself too, if that makes any sense. But it's just develop your own experiences and try not to learn from too many people. I think that's really important. That's why I didn't do co-angling, which isn't a good argument, because there's a lot of really good guys that came from co-angling. But I think that those guys are also really good at picking and choosing the experiences that they had with other anglers, and making them fit, their style of fishing, So anyways, trust your ability to, this is actually a really important point. It's not a throwaway point on this slide. Trust your ability to gauge how a lake is fishing. Okay, this is one thing that I think is really crucial to maintaining your confidence. When you go to a lake, we've all had practices where it's terrible, it's awful, but when you get back to the dock, everybody's saying how good it was. Trust yourself a little bit more in that circumstance. Make sure that you give yourself the benefit of the doubt, and just know in your gut that you are good enough to know whether or not it's fishing good or fishing bad. Because if you listen to those other guys and they say that they're catching them really good, and then it turns out during the first day of the tournament they're not catching them, and you had changed your whole plan based on what those other guys were saying, it could end up really bad. So it's really important to trust yourself, because once that tournament starts, or that fun fishing trip starts, then if you're trusting yourself, you're going to make those good decisions based on what the situation is that you're seeing. If it's tough fishing, maybe you need to pick up that spinning rod and go catch a limit, because a lot of times it was supposed to be a slugfest, and then during the tournament I followed my gut, went out there, just caught a limit like I thought it would require, and came in and did really, really well. So trust your ability to gauge how lake is fishing. All right, we're at the Q&A. Whew. That was a slideshow that I was a little bit worried about, because it's got a lot of information. It's kind of a big deal. So let's go ahead. I told you guys I was going to do some giveaways before we get to the Q&A. We're going to get to Q&A and answer everybody's questions, but we're going to do a giveaway right now. So what we're going to do, you know, we're actually going to do it the opposite, because I thought that you guys would be marked, you know, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're not. So we're going to wait till the end, because I don't want to flood the questions thing with the amount of answers. So let's go through a few questions, and then we can do the giveaway. Okay. All right. Shannon asked, do you ever gather research from local anglers and try their way of fishing if you strike out on your way? On my way. Sometimes yes. I think that it's really important to be cognizant of what locals do, because they know the lake the best. But again, I really try to focus on what I like to do and what I do best, because it allows me to make better decisions on the fly. So you really got to balance the doc talk and what the locals say with your own gut instincts. So follow your gut. If it fails you, like you just fall flat on your face, you may be in one of those situations where a lake is really different than your experiences in the past, and you need to run with that. But just be careful with that information. Garrett asks, what is my go-to bait when searching an area that you have never been to before? So the baits that I listed in there, those are my go-to baits. If I had to pick one, I'd have to say a chatterbait. Chatterbait, especially when it's dirtier water, dirtier, shallow, and you know, any time of the year, a chatterbait's my favorite for sure. Sean asks, I'm in East Tennessee and we've had a ton of rain. The lakes are extremely high. I know that. So how would you approach this issue? First off, I would stay as far away from the main lake as possible. Number one, for you know, on the TVA, I wouldn't even go fishing right now, because it's a safety issue. But if I had to go out in a tournament, so on and so forth, I would stay away from the current. I'd focus on the areas that are still the areas where they should be, you know, for the seasonal pattern, whatever season it's in, but focus on the ones that are out, you know, protected from current. And I'd try to find the clearest water that I possibly could, which is going to be hard, and you know, that's kind of where I would start. I would really focus on the low current areas. And one thing that's really important to remember when it comes to high water is that fish aren't automatically going to go to the bank, especially during the springtime and the colder months. Those fish are going to stay where the original water line was most of the time. Okay, so that's something that I've learned time and time again. I relearned it again at Sam Rayburn down in Texas, because those fish were at the same exact spot that they probably were when the water level was normal, because it was during the early spring. All right, Mitch, my boy Mitch. All right, so he asks, how do you break down a river? You know how we break down a river? We've gone fishing on a river before. Uh, so river systems are a little bit different. I'm still not an expert when it comes to river system, but I think it really all has to do with two different factors: current breaks and backwater areas. In the spring, you know, when they're getting ready to spawn, it's those backwater areas. You know, if it's in a transition period, you know, pre-spawn or post-spawn, I'll focus on the current breaks that are really close to those spawning areas, and so on and so forth. But the rest of the year, you know, you're in the wintertime, you're going to be focusing on those areas that have low current, but maybe close to current, and which we call, you know, eddies and breaks like that. And then the rest of the year, I just run those current areas, you know, those current break areas. So you just in a river system, you just got to cover water, junk fish, and find the best current break. That's really what it comes down to, or the best backwater, depending on the season. All right. Mass, he says, I'm upriver from you in Johnson City, Tennessee. Lakes are rising with dirty, cold water. So the techniques and what techniques and areas would I suggest to locate bass? Again, I would do exactly what I said before with the previous question that was kind of related to that. I would focus on the areas that are just out of that just blown out main river. I would really focus on the areas that have lower current and have the cleanest water. I think if you find lower current and cleaner water, you're going to do a whole lot better. But again, don't avoid the original places where those fish were. They're not going to move up very fast in a lot of situations. All right, some of these questions are really good questions. I may not answer everybody's question because some of them are similar to the ones that I've already answered, and I don't want to keep everybody up. If I don't answer your specific question, email me at sonar@sonarfishing.com and I'll get you an answer. This is a good question. Trent asks, do you think Florida strain migrate like northern strain? I feel like Buck Perry stuff concerns, or I think he means northern strain, NA strain. But as far as the Florida versus northern strain, yeah, I think that they do migrate a little bit differently. I think that Florida strain generally tend to focus more on shallower cover, like on Chickamauga here. Some of the biggest fish that you're seeing, the double digits that you're seeing right now, are being caught in 2 foot of water or less. And it's pre-spawn conditions. Maybe not right now, but in general, the Florida strain largemouth love that shallow water. Northern strain really spread out, and they tend to group up a little bit deeper. So good question. Ooh, I'm gonna go to the back of the line here and start over here. Actually, since we cleaned up some of the questions, let's go ahead and do the giveaway. I've got 2 lucky tackle boxes to give away, 1 lucky tackle box shirt, or 2 shirts and a lucky tackle box hat. So let's go ahead and do that. I've got a Sonar hat full of numbers here. I'm going to ask you guys to say a number write down a number in the questions box between 1 and 110, and go ahead and do that now. The first one to say the correct number, which I'm going to take out right now, put to the side. Oh man, I hope. And the person that's closest without going over will win it too. Oh, so close. Oh, Trent, you win a lucky tackle box. 84 was your guess, and that is 84. It says 48, but it's 84. All right, Trent Holloway, I'm going to need your email address. So if you can email me at sonar@sonarfishing.com with your email address, please do so. All right, so number 2. And same numbers, we're going to use the same numbers just for sake of not writing all this down. All right, because the same person can't win twice. 24. Who did 24? All right, I got to come up with a better system for giving away stuff. That doesn't include me sifting through numbers and making mistakes. We're definitely going to be cutting this out of the recording. Danny Yoon, you won 24. Right on. Good job. All right. So email me, sonar@sonarfishing.com. You got a lucky tackle box. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to actually add the shirt or one of the hats to the shirt, to a shirt, and do a drawing right now. 63. Ooh, I already see a 63, but I got to make sure that it's not. Oh, man. This was a terribly designed contest, but I'm glad for Lucky Tackle Box giving us this stuff. All right. All right, Chris. Chris Abram, you win the shirt and the hat. Send me an email, sonar@sonarfishing.com. All right. Final one for a hat or for a Lucky Tackle Box shirt, 28. All right, let's look through this real quick and get back to the Q&A. I need like a helper for this. Rod Phillips, you won. You were the first one to answer 28. All right, perfect. Send me an email at sonar@sonarfishing.com. Thank you guys for waiting through that. Let's get back to the questions. Let's stick to the subjects here. My buddy Kyle Jenkins, I practiced with him during the Opens for a couple years. Good dude. He moved down. He's with the Coast Guard. So anybody that values the Coast Guard for saving lives, give him a big thanks. He's awesome. So at your Rayburn Tour event, my Rayburn Tour event, you were fishing drains. Can you define a drain? Good question, because that was something I had to clarify with the local guys. So let's go to the Navionics web app real quick. Just, why do I keep on making that mistake? All right, chart viewer. So even though we're in on Chickamauga, which we don't call them drains here, a drain is essentially just where a creek or some irrigation dumps into an area. So if you imagine the lake down, it's whatever little creek channel the rain would create dumping into that area. So what I was fishing was it's just essentially a little creek. That's all it is. But it's just that little depression leading from the shoreline out into an area. That's essentially all it is. It's just another way of saying it. It's like specks down in Florida versus crappie, elsewhere. So good question. Bob asks, are there any good computer programs for researching contours on a lake prior to fishing a lake? I'm looking at one right now. If you go to navionics.com and go to their chart viewer, that is a free, uh, it's a free program. It's just like going on Google Earth and you get all the contours. It's awesome. And you can switch between, sonar charts and nautical charts. It's a really cool deal. So thanks for the question. So Charlotte asks, what is my favorite time of year for topwater? My favorite time of year for topwater is probably the summertime or right at the post spawn period and also in the fall. So anywhere from post spawn through the fall is my favorite period of time. So generally May through October. That's my favorite. I would say probably the fall is probably the best out of them all. The early fall period. Jeff asks, what trailers do I find best on chatterbaits for pre-spawn? So I just kind of went through a little paradigm shift with my trailers on chatterbaits. If you had asked me this before the Sam Rayburn event, I would say 100% of the time I use a diesel minnows from Z-Man. Like that is my favorite trailer. It's really good. It has a boot style tail to it. It adds some action to it, but not too much. But at that event, I ended up using the Razor Shads from Z-Man, which is a sectioned bait that adds just it has a great flowing profile to it while you're swimming it, but when you stop it, it has this do nothing fall that creates a nice glide to it. And during the colder months, when a bait fish isn't going to be making all those unnecessary movements because they're really sluggish, that kind of do nothing trailer seems to work really good. I've also used jerk bait trailers too, fluke styles or jerk shad style baits. All right, my buddy Mike, a fellow Navionics specialist, he asked, what has been the biggest eye-opening experience since starting the pro tour in regards to actually fishing? Congrats on your success since starting. Simplify and tight lines. Thanks, buddy. So my biggest eye-opening experience was at Toho, and well, I've actually got two. Toho, not based on fishing, but based on my, trusting my gut was that U-turn I did that saved the entire event and fished that area that I'd never fished before. It just opened my eyes to the fact that my gut is good enough to make good decisions on the fly under most circumstances. So that was a really cool experience. But at Sam Rayburn, another really eye-opening experience was what we talked about with the water level. The lake was 9 foot high. The trees went for miles. At the edge of the bushes that were submerged, those cypress trees and all those bushes that were submerged, that line, once you got up to those trees, there were 14 feet of water. So it went back for a long way. So you'd think that those fish would just automatically go into the back of those flats that are just covered in cover, but they stayed right where they were before the high water in those pre-spawn areas, the drains, in the same exact areas. So that was a big eye-opening experience for me, was fishing the same areas even under those drastic conditions. Thanks for the question, man. Stephen asks, Lake Fort, Texas, Friday will be 70 degrees, but a cold front moves in with high winds. How would you adjust? Let me think for a second. So it depends on what it's been prior to the cold front. This time of year they're getting hit by cold fronts often, so it could not have that much of a effect on them. That is possible because we're getting hit by so many cold fronts. But if it was warm, and they started to spawn, which I don't think that they are in that period or in that region. I'm not sure. I would probably I would definitely fish reaction style baits because you're not going to effectively fish slow techniques in the wind. So I'm still wanting to cover water with the reaction style baits, but I'm going to fish them in areas where they're more pre-spawn, and reaction bait doesn't necessarily just mean a bait that like a chatterbait or spinner bait. It could be a Carolina rig too. So I would probably from everything I'm hearing in that region, they're still highly pre-spawn. So I'd focus on pre-spawn structure, and I would either fish, crankbaits, drag a Carolina rig until you find them, and just cover a lot of water. But I wouldn't ignore the shallow fishing either, because if the fish did move up because of that warm water leading up to the event, they're not automatically going to leave back to the deeper structure. So it's a toss-up. It's hard. Unfortunately, that's going to be your job to kind of experiment and figure that out during the tournament. But thanks for the question. Brian asks, what's the best advice to look for offshore fishing? We're tired of beating the bank with everybody else. Headed to Guntersville Thursday for a youth FLW tournament. Woo-wee. Boy, I hope that that the lake is okay by the time you get there, because it is super high right now. But yeah, so man, I'm kind of gonna talk you out of fishing offshore right now on Guntersville. I think Guntersville can be a really good offshore lake, but right now I think that Guntersville is probably going to be a better shallow fishery. This time of year, you usually are looking for the remaining grass in those low current bays and creeks, and so I would still fish shallow. But if I was going to go fish deep, I would focus on those transition areas, points, the current breaks that lead into the backs of these creeks, the bridges. I would definitely focus on the bridges. Even though that's not an offshore thing, I would focus on the creeks that lead into the bridges. That's a big transition type pattern on Guntersville. Everybody knows that. Man, I wish I could give you specific information on that, but fishing offshore, just use your electronics, idle around there. If you've got some time to practice, idle around those areas where they're likely holding before they move into those spawning areas, and see if they're there. It's all about finding those fish first, and don't make a cast until you see them on the screen. There's no doubt that they're there, and if you can't find them, go back to beating the bank, because I think that the conditions favor that. Hopefully that answered the question. Trent asks a good question. How does falling or drawing down water affect the spawn? I've seen this a lot. If a lake is fluctuating in water level a lot, like for instance, rising water on Douglas Lake, a lot of times those fish are going to wait until the water stabilizes, and I've seen that happen with falling water too. It just depends on how fast the water's falling. If the water's falling very quickly, the fish are going to hold off from spawning for a little bit in most cases. Jake from Kansas, how would you make on the water decisions as a co-angler when you don't have a lot of say in the area or depth zone to fish? That's a good question. I'm not an expert co-angler. Oh, I know Jake. What's going on, Jake? But you will be an expert co-angler. I think it really, I actually envy that position every once in a while, because being a co-angler and it's kind of cool to be able to adjust with something that you have no control over like that. And so I don't know. I think that the biggest key for co-anglers is making sure that you've got rods that, like we talked about, different categories, your biggest strengths in each category. Have one finesse fishing rod with your very favorite finesse fishing tactic. Have a rod that is your favorite shallow water tactic, your favorite deep water tactic, and your favorite for fishing for suspended fish. And then of course have enough baits to adjust within, you know, the different situations. But I think the biggest key to making those adjustments is being prepared with the baits that you are the most confident in. I think that that's always going to be your best bet. All right, Tim asks, how do I tell if I'm looking at bass on a 2D sonar? 2D sonar is, you're never going to tell for sure whether or not you're looking at bass. That's the hard part. The first thing that you look for is a solid return, which means that, you know, on most color palettes, you're talking about yellow in the center of the fish. If you have yellow in the center of the fish, and you know, that means that it's a larger fish, it's a larger return. If it's just this little, you know, faint blue and red, usually that means that it's, you know, a smaller fish or something that you're not interested in. But the biggest key is how they relate to the bottom. Bass generally relate more to the bottom, and they stack, you know, head to tail. They kind of spread out on the bottom. They don't stack on top of each other. If you see fish stacked on top of each other, that could just be mistakenly or it could just be a tree, could be a brush pile, or it could be like white bass or crappie. Bass do not stack on top of each other. So it's really important once you see, if you see one or two, three marks very close to the bottom, they're all within the same area. That's generally bass. And a lot of the time, bass also or catfish also look a lot like bass. So it's deciding whether or not, you know, they're bass or catfish. But those two look very similar, and also drum as well. But generally, they're close to the bottom and they're kind of stacked head to tail. Chris asks, do I have a system for managing my waypoints pre-tournament? Not really. I've got just the Navionics mobile app where I can put waypoints on there, and I can actually. So the answer is actually yes. I've got the Navionics app that I can, you know, put all my waypoints on, all my points of interest, and then I can actually transfer those through the linking the Wi-Fi link to my Lowrance unit, and I can put those waypoints on there, which is really cool. What brand? Ron asks, what brand of chatterbait that is heavier than a ½ ounce? Z-Man actually has several different types of chatterbaits that are made all the way up to 1 1/4 ounce. The Jackhammer has a 3/4 ounce, and then it also has an 1 1/4 ounce version, which is really cool for deep water fishing. Ryan asks, does dirty water change how you search for fish? What if the whole lake is dirty? Yeah, absolutely. Dirty water really does change the way that I look for fish. It eliminates a lot of water. If the water is really, really muddy, those fish are going to focus shallower and shallower. Under most circumstances, especially after the spawn and through the summer and in the fall, the dirtier the water, the more fish are going to relate to cover. You know, if it's you know, low visibility, those fish just like to group around cover and structure tighter because it makes them feel safe, and they just want to relate to something. So that's generally what I do is in dirtier water, I focus shallower. If the whole lake is dirty, you just got to find the place that has the least dirty water. And I know that's kind of a obvious, you know, cliche, but it's true. Will asks, when do you decide when your plan isn't working and it's time to change? This is the $1 million question. I mean, this is what separates the best fisherman in the world from the best tournament fisherman in the world, or, you know, just a good tournament fisherman from somebody that struggles. decision making is critical, and the best guys make the best decisions. And I really think that it all comes down to your gut feelings. I think if something is telling you inexplicably that you need to do something, you need to do it, and that's the change you need to make. So I would really, everything that I talked about really just kind of, comes into the fact that you need to learn to trust yourself, your gut, and your own experiences. So when my gut starts telling me I need to make a change, that little faint, inexplicable feeling, I need to make that change. And then the conditions also need to confirm that too. So if you think you need to fish shallow because it's a little bit dirtier water, and that's what your gut's telling you, and the conditions confirm that, you're good to go. Make that change and don't look back. How do you determine a spotted bass from a largemouth bass on sonar? From Garrett. Good question. It's a little bit harder. Generally, spotted bass are more pelagic feeders, so they suspend a lot more. They're in all parts of the water column. They kind of act like a striper, but they don't school up quite as big in the same way. So that's the only way that I know to tell, because they look the same on the sonar. It's just the way that they relate to the bottom. Usually they're off the bottom a little bit more and suspended. Ron asks, are there general seasonal considerations in deciding to fish uphill or downhill on structure? I think what you mean is where you position your boat, whether you're casting from on a point from the deep side of the point or casting to the deep side of the point from the shallow side. My answer on that is not really, but obviously during the spring, those fish are spawning, you want to make sure that you're fishing from the deep side, casting shallow, because if you're shallow, you're likely fishing where those fish are spawning in a lot of situations. So generally, I usually fish from the deep side out, but it's always important once you find a group of fish to try it from different angles. Even if you haven't caught a fish off of that school that you found with your sonar yet, it may just be the angle. So you just try it from different angles. All right, we're almost getting through it. Thank you guys so much for staying on here. There's still a ton of people here. I hope this is all good information for you. I really do appreciate your time tonight, because I know that it is late on a Monday. So thank you. How do you approach lakes with heavy pressure and boat traffic? I fish the busiest inland waterway in the country. I love boat traffic. I love it. I really do. Under most circumstances, I use it to my benefit, because that churning of the water, that movement. A lot of people focus on windy banks, and the reason that windy banks are so good in a lot of situations is because it's churning everything up. It's moving bait fish around. So a lot of times I will focus on those areas that are most affected by the wakes, and fish reaction baits and move quickly through those areas. I'm not going to be fishing as slow. I like to fish reaction baits. So in those high traffic areas, sometimes those are the areas that I seek out the most. Randall asked, do you recommend a side scan or down scan for trolling motor mount? I only recommend down scan for the trolling motor, because of the way that the technology works. Side scan still works, and there's actually been an instance for me at Champlain where my co-angler just whooped me because he could see the rock piles we were dropping down to on either side of the boat while I was on the bow. All I could see was what was directly below the boat. But down scan, between the two, down scan's the one that's going to help you the most, because you're trying to figure out what you're looking at up there. And side imaging, because you're moving very slow with the trolling motor or not moving at all, the image is going to be stretched out and you're not going to be able to tell what it is. All you can see is maybe a shadow, which denotes like a big boulder or a tree or something like that. All you're going to see is those shadows. So but as far as seeing an image, you only see that when you're going, 4.5 to 6 miles an hour. So down scan is my choice. Tony asks, Miles, do you have any idea when, if Lowrance will allow us to do contour depth shading similar to Hummingbird? Um, you can do it a little bit right now. You can actually play with the safety depth. You can play with the shallow depth. There's some things that you can do, but as far as similar to Hummingbird, I'm not actually sure. Uh, Guy asks, what does the Navionics mobile app do? What do you get? I kind of explained it during the presentation. It offers you contour maps. It offers you all kinds of points of interest and information on those, and also offers you color depth shading, which is cool. Routing, tide information, weather information, wind direction and velocity information. There's all kinds of stuff that it does, and it's super, super cheap for what you get. So just go to the App Store on either Android or iPhone, get it. You won't regret it. Brian asks, do you ever switch from power fishing to finesse during pre-fishing if the conditions are tough? Yeah, sometimes I will, just to kind of figure out if that's how I need to fish. If the fishing is so tough that I'm not getting bit on anything fast moving, yeah, I'll definitely slow down, but I'll still fish those baits fast. Like, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'm not going to, soak a point really fast. I'm still trying to find those fish that are the most active and stupid out of the group, and catch those. But I'll use the finesse tactics quicker. I'm not going to fish them like I would in a tournament, or when the money's on the line. I'm just trying to find those areas really, really fast. Nick asks, this is a really good question. Are there certain colors that you prefer to work with as a starting point when it comes to, I'm assuming, you know, uh, you know, just color selection in general? Yes. And what I like to do, my system consists of, if it's clearer water, go natural. Go to the most natural presentation. If you're using a bottom bouncing technique, match it to the color of the bottom, whether it's sand colored, use watermelon red or watermelon around grass, green pumpkin around muddy, brownish bottoms. And then if it's in the water column, match it to the color of the bait fish, or if it has like a green tint to the water, have a little bit of green mixed into that shad colored bait that you're using. If it's dirtier water, use baits that stand out, more opaque, bright whites, yellows, reds, for like fast moving crankbaits, and then black and blue and even green pumpkin for the slow moving baits. So just keep it natural, keep it simple. You'll still catch fish on a color, even if it's not the exact preferred color for that area. RJ Gall asks, what is your preferred method for working a heavy chatterbait deep? There's three ways. Either a straight retrieve, count it down to the depth and retrieve it back slowly. There's this, the same retrieve, but adding a little bit of action to it, popping it or stopping it. And then there's also a yo-yo technique, which is really, really effective in a lot of situations out deep. Essentially just yo-yoing it, letting it fall back down to the bottom, like stroking a football jig. All right, we're getting. Those of you, again, if you have any questions or anything, you can email me at sonar@sonarfishing.com. Before we get a little bit deeper and people start, dropping off here, we need to give I need to give a big thanks to Lucky Tackle Box and Navionics for putting this whole thing on there. And I need to give you guys a big thanks too, because you guys took, again, your night out of your weekday. I know that it's Monday for some of us living on the East Coast, so thank you so much for being here. It's an honor. So really appreciate it. Bashar asked, do you always fish areas that are protected from a north wind? During the spring, tends to be what I gravitate towards, but as I learned at Toho, if it's been calm, it opens up the entire lake, so don't avoid other good-looking areas. But as far as the rest of the year, no, I will actually chase the wind and follow it around. Steven asks, what's my biggest largemouth in a tournament? I think it's an 8-pounder. I actually caught 2 8-pounders in a tournament on Okeechobee in the same day, but I think that's my biggest. Trent Holloway asked, do you think line size is important regardless of size or fish and pressure? Yeah, it's very important, especially for finesse tactics, and slow moving baits. It's really important to match, to downsize the line when the fish is looking at it more, so that is really important. Wow, thank you guys very much. I'm reading some of the comments on the bottom. Thank you very much for all your comments. Larry asks, my good buddy Larry, looked like a tough tournament over there, man. If the colored water is several degrees warmer than the clear water, like in Dale Hollow this weekend, he was fishing the BFL. How much time would you spend in each to determine the best potential? Really, in extreme conditions like that, I tend to focus more on cleaner water in general, and I think the dirtier water really throws those fish for a loop. And I think what you're seeing at your event, and I may be wrong, is I think a lot of the guys were probably fishing a little bit deeper at that original, the original depth where those fish were living. So I mean, it's hard to tell without being out there, but I would probably focus almost all my energy in the cleanest water I could possibly find, which is the most stable conditions. And so that's just what my gut tells me, even though I love fishing muddy water. Kevin asks, what is the size chatterbait I use for shallow grass? I really like to use either a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce. 3/8 for 3 foot or less, and 1/2 ounce for 3 foot or more. Generally is what I use. All right, just going through these. Yeah, Danny asked, do you have any videos on the setting for your Lowrance unit? Yes, if you go to my YouTube channel, Sonar Fishing, I should have some good electronics videos on there for you. Please, if you guys are watching, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I would really appreciate that, and I'll ask me questions and I'll do videos on it. Ryan asked, what's the difference between sonar charts and nautical charts? Nautical charts are the traditional sonar. They're the traditional maps. So let's give an example here. So this is the toggle between sonar charts and nautical charts. And nautical charts, which we call Navionics here, as you can see, here's Chester Frost Park. A lot less detail, still nice and detailed. It's really good for navigation because it's not all cluttered. You can see just at a glance where the deep water and where the shallow water is. But sonar charts really get the 1 foot contours. It's the most up-to-date data. So it's really, really good for shallow water fishing and just fishing in general. Garrett asks, what depth do I focus on in very muddy water? Shallow. Shallow as possible in extreme mud. That's where I fish, because those fit, and I fish right against cover. You slow down and fish, thoroughly fish cover, because those strike zones are going way down to very narrow focus. So slow down. All right, guys. I think well, let's see. All right, I'm going through this. I think that we've pretty much gone through most of the questions. Again, I told you that I'd answer all your questions, and so if you have any specific questions, please contact me. And I would really appreciate it if you guys follow me on Facebook. Go to my professional page, Miles Sonar Burghoff, and then go to Sonar Fishing at Instagram, and then of course the YouTube page is Sonar Fishing. Again, thank you guys so much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it. Truly an honor, and keep up with me on the tour this year, and just just send me whatever questions you have, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Again, thank you guys for showing up, and I'll see you guys out on the water. Appreciate it.